all my friends here in the front. When you hear the words equity, diversity, and inclusion, what comes to mind for you? Maybe they're buzzwords you've heard over the last year, or maybe they're concepts that were introduced to you in your last HR training. Or maybe you've never heard of them at all, and that's okay too. In fact, I didn't even know what the word diversity meant until I was almost 18 years old. Now, these words and their concepts, they mean something very deeply meaningful to me. And what I'm going to do with you today is share with you how they shaped me in my career, but most importantly, give you a deeper understanding of how they might be showing up in your workplace. Think about any town in America. There's a main street where trees line the block. Everyone knows everyone's name, and there is always a debate on where to find the best slice of pizza. That's the type of town that I grew up in. And when I was about 18 years old, I started applying to universities, and I quickly realized that I was being recruited into diversity programs. So I had to pause and ask myself, diversity, what is that? I had only ever really heard of it in the concept of biology class, ecosystems, things like that. But it was in that moment that I realized that I didn't just grow up in any town. I grew up in a town that was a microcosm of diversity. Black, white, Latinx, immigrant American, we all went to school together. No one ever felt like an outsider. And there was also something very special going on in my town. Those yellow school buses that you see on American TV, those school buses in my town were moving kids across the district so that there was an equal amount of diversity in each one of our schools. And this was me on graduation day, and that's my mom. I was so excited to go off to college and become an adult. Now, picture walking into your very first class on your very first day. And you look up and you notice that it's a room for 600 students. And you start to look around and you notice that there are only a few people who look like you. 1 in 6. 1 in 6, that was my reality. There were only 6 other people in that room that were not white. I felt like I had been beamed to another planet. I had never experienced anything like that before. And that was the first of many firsts for me in school. The first time that someone told me that they could never date a black girl. The first time that someone told me that the only reason I had gotten into my school was because the school wanted to improve its diversity statistics, and for no other reason. And it was the first time in my entire life that someone shouted the N-word at me while I was simply walking down the street. Flash forward to my career. In the beginning of my career, I started to experience a lot of onlys. The only black person on my team, the only black person in my department, the only black person in my entire company for a number of years, and I was often the only black person willing to speak up about workplace racism and discrimination. Now, lack of diversity at work shows up in different places. The way that we speak to each other, the way we make space for each other's ideas, and the way that we create experiences and products for our consumers built with heart. And despite what the research shows, that time and time again, more diverse teams create better business outcomes, our companies still struggle to bring equity, diversity, and inclusion into the core DNA of how we do business. Now, let's take a moment and do a deeper understanding of what each one of these words mean. First, diversity. Diversity is simply the presence of difference. Difference in where you come from, how you grew up, your gender, your identity. It simply means difference. Next, inclusion. Inclusion is your ability to show up to work and be your true, authentic self. In fact, inclusion understands that your uniqueness is just as critical to your job as your skill set. And when the two of those are working together, you can be your true, best creative self. Last, equity. Equity is not the same as equality. Equality assumes that if we all get the same resources, we will achieve the same goals. However, what equity understands is that not all of us are beginning at the same starting line. And what you might need to be successful might look very different than what I need to be successful. But if we understand those differences, we can truly give each other the right resources so that we can actually achieve the same outcomes. Now, if we can create a workplace built around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we can start to center our workplaces around a sense of belonging. If there's an imbalance of one or more of these, it can have very serious consequences on us as professionals, but also on our businesses. Let me give you a few examples. First, inclusion and equity, not enough diversity. I call this situation #so many white guys. Now, picture a boardroom full of mostly white men. It's not that hard to imagine because it is all too common here in Germany and around the world. In organizations like these, all too often, innovation is slow. It's either misunderstood or considered too risky. And that $1 billion idea that you left off of the table either went to your competitor or became your competition. This is a picture of Whitney Wolfe Herd. You may have heard of her. She is one of the co-founders of a very popular dating app called Tinder. Now, when her ideas on how to improve the experiences of women online went ignored, she decided to leave and start her own business called Bumble, also a very popular dating app that you may have heard of. Just earlier this year, Bumble IPO'd for a whopping $14 billion valuation. And situations like these are not uncommon. They go across industries: fashion, retail, beauty, the list goes on. Next, diversity and inclusion, not enough equity. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, diversity and inclusion, we nailed it. However, I call this situation #the power struggle. Picture that company that prides itself on its diversity and inclusion efforts. They bring in people from all walks of life. All too often, though, in these types of organizations where there's a lack of equity, you see those of diverse backgrounds coming into low-level or entry-level positions. When you walk inside some of these organizations, what you will notice is, for someone like me, the ability to climb the corporate ladder feels like you are climbing a mountain with no map and no compass. It's this gutted feeling inside of you that no matter how hard you try and no matter how hard you work, the only way to move up is to move out. And disengagement in German companies costs us a lot. It can cost our people burnout, absenteeism. It can cost us in low recommendation, where all of your employees are pretty much telling their friends, definitely don't apply here, this place is crazy. It can also lead to turnover. According to a Gallup study that was released just earlier this year, the cost of turnover in German businesses costs anywhere between 96 and 114 billion euro every single year. My last example, diversity and equity, not enough inclusion. I call this #I heard you, bud. Imagine you have been brought into your new organization as a leader. Everything you've done up until this moment has gotten you here. Your bold ideas, your creative solutions have brought you to this moment. But when you get inside of your organization, you start to hear little things like, let me play devil's advocate for a minute, or things like this in an organization like ours take time. Change here is slow. Imagine that you have to, the only way that your experiences and your ideas are taken seriously is if you start to behave just like everyone else. It's code switching. You have to turn off a piece of yourself and be a different version of who you are at work than you are at home. It is exhausting. It can easily lead to erode down mental health that will take a toll and ultimately lead to resentment. Now, I'm not going to explain to you what code switching means, but there are plenty of TED speakers who have come before me who can explain to you exactly what it means. Now, when we can create a workplace built around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we can center our workplaces around a sense of belonging. When we have a high sense of belonging, we as employees, we are more energized, we're more creative, we are doing our best job with our best energy, and we're ultimately more productive, which leads to better business outcomes. Think about where you work. Whether you're a team lead or an executive, I urge you to consider these 3 things on going back and taking this into your workplace. First, make mistakes. Make mistakes because we are all human beings trying to make the right choices, and sometimes we're going to make mistakes. But don't wait until you think you have the perfect solution to get started. Do small things little by little, and over time, you will be able to transform your work culture. Next, question your surroundings. Here in Europe, it is almost impossible to ask your employees to identify themselves against different diversity dimensions. However, if you see someone like me, the one, the only, or the 1 in 6, that's enough data to know you can start getting started on improving your workplace culture. Last, shake up the systems. Shake up the systems of reward and recognition. It is no longer enough to just reward leaders for achieving their sales targets. We must also reward leaders and employees who are challenging the systems, changing behaviors, and changing mindsets that will ultimately lead us to the workplace that we want to see. Now, this work isn't easy, and I'm not going to pretend like it is. And there's no clear waterfall project model to get it done. As the world changes, cultures change, so our work is truly never over. When I was 18, I learned what equity, diversity, and inclusion meant the hard way. But being informed means that we as business leaders now must do whatever it takes to make that one or that only employee feel like they too truly belong. It's not only the right thing to do for our people, it's critical for our businesses to survive. The choice is yours. Thank you.